really, oh, is recording. Yeah, so Damien was going to kind of take us through council goals and how the two timelines, both for the strategy and the economic development strategy, and then the EOA, which follows it, which is the real land use component for employment lands of the UGB, how they fit into council goals, the proposed timing of those. And then I just wanted to ask you all a couple of questions around this survey, this SWOT survey that I'm shooting to get out late this week or early next to really start getting us some data to work off of. So any questions beforehand or feedback now that we have figured out our technical issues?
The only question I've got, Ben, is your target dates for the kickoff meeting, but I'm sure that'll come up.
Yeah, let's cover that at the end. Yeah, for sure. So I thought that would come up, and yeah, definitely want to touch on it. So. All right.
Okay, should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Amy.
All right. Well, this is a short slide presentation. Can everybody see that? Because now that I'm sharing, I can't see who's on. I want to make sure people can see it.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. I think, yeah.
No, I'm still seeing your video, Damien.
Okay, let me share then. Share screen. There we go. There we go. All right.
Perfect. I'm seeing it over here.
Okay. Okay. People can see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to circle back to the council goals. The council has approved their goals back in March, and they are now informing the work that's being done on the budget. And starting in May, the council will start the more public process on presenting the budget and then a work plan. One of the council's goals that they identified was affordable housing and sustainable development. And they set a strategy of encouraging economic development that results in shared prosperity. Two key projects they included in their goals, and now they're being incorporated in our 2-year work plan, are to establish the economic development strategic plan and also complete the economic opportunities analysis. The schedule for the strategic plan is scheduled to start third quarter of this year and wrap up by end of first quarter next year. And you'll see that that's going to overlap somewhat with the work being done on the economic opportunities analysis starting later this year in 2023, and then wrapping up by second quarter of 2026. Before talking about the actual schedule of public meetings, I wanted to highlight that one thing to know about the EOA, because I'm going to say EOA instead of the whole analysis title, is that this work is being incorporated in the larger work plan that's going to look at our supply of land and the current urban growth boundary for both housing and economic development. And this is over a 3-year period, or 2.5-year period, where we'll incorporate this work in terms of looking at land supply for employment alongside the land supply for housing. And then going back to council in a couple of years to confirm, here's what we're recommending as a city in terms of some type of urban growth boundary expansion, what that looks like, and get their approval to then proceed to that next phase of actually evaluating potential areas to include based on our needs for either for housing or employment. In terms of next steps, I've put those on the right side of the slide. The council is going to get a presentation of the budget at their May 3rd work session. I think that's scheduled to start at 5:30. In May, at their second meeting, they're going to get a presentation on the final work plan. And then the budget committee, which includes the entire city council, and I'm drawing a blanket, a number of other members of the community who form the overall budget committee, will hold public meetings on May 22nd and 23rd. One thing I just wanted to mention just briefly, the relationship between these two projects is the economic development strategy is intended to inform the target industries we want to support, what job growth looks like based on forecasts, and then developing that vision then supports what industries we're going to be looking to support, and then take that deeper dive into, what industries are going to need land based on their characteristics and their site sizes and infrastructure needs. And that informs both the evaluation of land inside the current boundary, and then if we need to look at expanding that boundary, where we look to potentially expand, find site sizes and the characteristics going to be needed for those key industries. So that was really, I think, just the update presentation I wanted to give. I wanted to see if there was any questions while we're here.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in too on the economic development strategic plan. We're obviously starting or have started work already. Council goals run from Q3 of 2023 through Q2 of 2025. So I think, right? Yeah, they're 2-year goals. So this is really for the council goal setting purposes. We're saying work starts at the beginning of their council goal timeline, even though we've started work already. I put Q1 2024 and they're really thinking that we would be having council discussions in the first quarter of 2024, maybe first saying, are we on the right track? And then second, kind of, if they have any feedback that needs to be incorporated, giving us some leeway to go back to BDAP, talk through those, any potential changes, incorporate any council feedback, and then get final approval. That should line up pretty well with the EOA work, since starting in Q4, that's going to be an RFP for a consultant. I'm assuming,
Right,
Damien.
right.
So
Right. I think,
line up.
and that's an important point. If I could add that one of the next tasks, once council approves budget, is to work on an RFP that would go out so that we can work with a team of firms that will help us focus on getting the work done for the housing capacity work and employment economic opportunities analysis. And then the other infrastructure planning that needs to go in regarding transportation, water, and sewer.
Perfect. And Kelly, see your hand raised there.
Yeah, just a quick question. Can you remind me, so how long does the EOA last? Like, what's the lifespan of that?
It's tended to be a 20-year document.
Okay.
And it's not one we update every 20 years, but really we're looking at 20 years ahead, with the goal that we would then update that in 5 to 6 years, ideally.
Got it. Thanks.
And this is probably me speaking out of turn as not a land use planner, but I know there's a whole lot of stuff swirling in the legislative session right now. You have a governor who wants to make it, I think, easier, at least in her housing strategy, to expand UGBs. So starting then, maybe we're incorporating some new legislation or any legislative changes. Damien keeps nodding, which is good. As our legislative expert around, does this become a more dynamic plan, or is it just more straightforward in how you expand a UGB? I think these are all questions that will be answered during the legislative session and then anything that comes out of that before we get to the actual EOA work.
That is all correct. There are still, if I could just add on briefly, there are a number of bills that the city is engaging on regarding housing, and some of them also address land supply, which, as a city, what we've tried to do with our last UGB expansion is look at housing and employment lands at the same time. So we're not trying to follow one process with the other. And I think dynamic is a really good word, because other than the governor's housing package being passed, there are still a number of bills in play. And we're also hearing that there's some new direction from the governor's Housing Production Advisory Council, which released their framework yesterday. And our lobbyist, our chancellor, has brought that to my attention, and I'm reviewing that to see whether there might be some overlap regarding housing, employment, and urban growth boundary work.
Perfect. Any other questions for Damien? I think we can probably stop sharing the screen so we can see everyone if anyone has feedback or questions. But I think the key point is that, and this is something we've been working on internally for the last couple of weeks with the folks that are kind of the key staff for different council goals, is do the timelines align, right? So are we wrapping up, in this case, the economic development strategy in a time frame that allows us to move forward on the EOA, and I think we're good. But wanted everyone to understand kind of where we're at and what the timelines are. Any other questions, feedback, ideas?
My
right.
my only thought, Ben, is that this is a lot later than we originally planned, but it does sound like if all we're doing is informing the EOA and no other decisions in the interim, then aligning it with the input needed to the EOA is the right thing, and we don't need to artificially accelerate this process. So I think we're good.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up, Travis, because there's this strategic kind of initiative around let's get you the economic development strategy to help inform the EOA, right? Which really kind of started this work. I think I can share this all with you internally. There's a move to hire an economic development manager, and really city leadership want this strategy to inform the broader economic development work as well. But one of the reasons I've been kind of soft pedaling this, along with the fact that we're kind of embedded in budget and goal setting time right now, is whoever that economic development manager is, don't want to get so far down the road that if it isn't me, that that we're kind of off track from where they may be looking to kind of implement this as well. And that's something that should be figured out in the next couple of weeks. Just kind of waiting on staff higher up the chain than me to kind of iron that out. So that's some inside baseball stuff, but we have kind of the guiding city staff work long term, which I think is going to be that foundational policy document for that. And then just informing the EOA, which I think is a component of this, which is just mostly that target sector analysis. What industries do we want to seek to promote and ban long term?
Gotcha. So 2 weeks until that decision is made.
We're moving at government speed here, so.
All right. That makes sense. Thanks for giving us that.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah,
inside scoop.
So kind of juggling a few things here, but I think we're close enough to the finish line of that being figured out at this point that we can share. That's where we're at. Any other questions on timeline, timing, council goals, or feedback?
Not on timeline for me, but I'm interested on how we're going to get the really comprehensive community feedback. Like, what's that list of outreach look like?
Yeah, and I don't have a good slide on that right now, but maybe that's something we talk a little bit more in May. I think we wanted to start with a SWOT, right? And this is a good bridge to that discussion. So COIC, I'm on their Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Working Group. It's a much higher level document that kind of knits together all the municipalities in the county, Sun River's involved, around what our economic development strategy for the region looks like. They did a SWOT for the stakeholders of that. I've taken some of their language. They did a really good job of kind of explaining what a strength, how to kind of provide input on what a strength is for your community, weakness, opportunity, and threat. So I'm kind of co-opting their survey language, slimming it down, and we'll kind of start developing some data and some outreach by sending that out to the 7,500 folks on the business registration list. Using working with our partners, I'm thinking EDCO, the Chamber, Visit Ben, Cascade Business News is always happy to share items like this, just to drive some initial feedback. But I think we have the business registration list and our partners to kind of give interim updates. I know in our work plan, there's this goal of focus groups kind of as we get closer to the end with real target industries as well. But we do have these communications outlets to kind of get that broader feedback. And does that answer your question, Travis, around broader feedback? I mean, the kickoff kind of as well, and we'll talk about that.
Right. No, I mean, you have a lot of channels covered there. As we progress, though, we should keep bringing it up to this group as to what additional channels we can use.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, this is a good tee up. So my notion for the SWOT is really just let's get some baseline data so we can actually speak with some authority around this is what industries are dealing with, or consider our areas of economic strength, threats, and the like. I was going to slim it down. I had to fill out the COIC survey, and they wanted 10 ideas for each of those 4 categories. And I think it took me like 45 minutes of hard thinking to get like the last 4 or 5 on each one. I was thinking 3, no requirement to provide 3. We'll keep it open-ended. We'll use SurveyMonkey so you can fill it out on your phone, and then just get some basic classification data. So what industry are you in? Question for you all. Do you want me to force folks into broad classification so we can say hospitality? We can actually do some crosstabs and say, hospitality sees these issues in their industry, manufacturing sees these. And same question for employees. We can ask for just any number, or we can work to kind of classify folks into sole proprietor, 2 to 10 employees, 10 to 50, 50 and up. I'm leaning towards let's kind of try to force respondents into these broader buckets so we can get a better idea of just general themes at this point, but would love your feedback.
I agree with the broader buckets. I'm thinking of industries though, like hospitality, and there's so many different subgroups with different realities they're facing, whether it's hotel operators or it's retail or it's restaurateurs or guide services. So
Sure.
I don't know if we want to get a little more granular, but with more granularity, there's more work. So
Yeah, and I think part of my concern too, having done some of these surveys in the past, is if we keep it to big buckets, folks are going to understand kind of where they fit. But I've done surveys where I've included development services as a broad bucket and left an option to put an alternative industry in there if you don't feel you fit anywhere. And all the realtors said they were not in development. While in my head, I was thinking, yeah, of course you're involved in development, right? So, yeah, I can play around and maybe try to keep it to 8 to 10 options and just a drop down list, or select which one you think you fit best in. And then at least we have some data where maybe we're looking at this and saying, wow, there's some really broad, there's no alignment in hospitality, for example, and we could do a follow-up survey using Visit Ben's industry mailing list then to try to kind of tease things out if there was something interesting there.
Yeah, I like the buckets too, also just from the perspective of, I'm hoping at some point, once we collect the information, we can see where there are gaps, so if there's certain industries or sectors that haven't participated all that much, maybe we can do like a targeted follow-up to make sure they're represented.
Perfect. It may also inform these focus groups as well, right, as we get further down the road. Especially if we are seeing some really funky stuff in certain industries. Any other questions you'd all like to see?
Yes.
I want to keep this pretty short, but if we can have, I think it's always, you can get away with adding some multiple choice or fairly easy questions at the end. This will be, of course, an anonymous survey and we'll aggregate feedback, but.
Yeah, so
I'd
Ben,
like to see some, oh, go ahead, Don. Don, you go first.
After that? I think we lost Don.
Well, I'll go until he's back, but I guess 2 comments. One, the Chamber of Commerce has done a number of surveys, and their classification of businesses is probably pretty solid from their standpoint. It may not be perfect for our use, but we may want to just potentially review it for alignment, since they do reach out to their members quite often. And then as far as other questions to ask, general sentiments of respondents as to, are they, bigger or smaller than they were 12 months ago? Are they anticipating 12 months from now being bigger or smaller than they are now, in terms of just where do they sit from an economic sentiment standpoint?
I like that. That's great.
There's
sorry,
probably
Ben,
better ways to ask that question. Go ahead, Don.
I'm sorry. So it sounds to me like we have the qualitative covered pretty darn well. And Ben, we've talked about this before. What are we doing with respect to the quantitative data? And tools to evaluate what industries we should target. Because we, of course, we find that we get a sentiment or a plan or a opinion that's coalescing that says we could do a certain thing. The overall economic support for that industry is not there. We wouldn't pursue it. So we talked briefly about consultants. I know that we're informing the EOA and those consultants that Damien mentioned, he's going to RFP. What are we going to rely on for this strategic plan?
Yeah, that's a good question, Don. I mean, the strategy is largely qualitative. That sector targeting is something where I think we can do a fairly small contract with an economist, someone like Damon Runberg or similar, right? Damon has kind of an offshoot of his day job that he does this sort of work, where it really would be around what industry, the qualitative data around what industries are thriving, what sort of salaries are they offering, and then I think it would be on this group to help winnow down that list right around looking at the data we're actually seeing, what's growing, what are the characteristics of the industries that are growing, that are employing people that can earn enough to buy a house or rent comfortably in Bend, whatever it may be. So that's where I think we're going to layer on some hard data with kind of this group and ultimately BDAB's input around, what those industries look, or which one of those industries seem promising. And I think we're really looking for more characteristics in certain cases, especially as we say we want to look at promoting these types of industries in the future, not necessarily going all the way in the weeds and saying, I'm trying to think of the actual technical term for what Lonza or Seren Bioscience do. We may just kind of come out more as, bioscience has been a growth industry in Bend. They provide and identifying some sectors like that. And I think how it could help inform your work then, Don, is we have at least an idea of these are the industries that industry characteristics that sit in the economic development strategy. So when you're out hunting around for businesses or responding to RFPs, you're kind of checking that as well. So maybe we're not looking at an Amazon fulfillment center, right, with $15 an hour wages and a high employee demand when we're dealing with a very constrained labor force on the other. So that's all a long way of saying the quantitative data is going to come from an economist that we'll get to really look at industrial trends locally, and then we'll kind of layer on your feedback.
Do we have a budget for that in this plan?
Yeah, I have a small consulting budget. And by I mean the business advocacy budget has a small consulting budget. And I've also talked to Brian Rankin and GMD about the long range planning division to help kind of prop that up if need be. But what I'm talking like 5,000 to 10,000 at the outside, maybe for something like this. It is not, a big RFP, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars type thing. It's an economist doing some math for us.
Yeah, I think one of the additional asks we can make of this smaller contract is everything you just described, but also asking them, what are you seeing in terms of growth industries that we haven't thought of that might do well here in Bend? Do we have the right characteristics in terms of locations, workforce, supporting industries, partnerships that they might look at Bend and go, hey, we've been doing this in other communities. Let's look at Bend as a potential place to grow as well.
Yeah, and I think this is something for the next meeting, but I will work on a draft scope for what that person will do. And I think we have some examples in the past that we can lean on as well. Really for this group to review at our May check-in.
Great, that sounds great. I think the qualitative work is important. I think on this call, we know a large majority of what we would want to know. Not everything, but we have a pretty solid understanding. We'll improve that. But I would hate to go too far before getting some hard data. And I think that we've used Damon in his new role, including his midnight job, to do some work with us in South County. And he's close to us. He knows the industry. He knows the characteristics of here. He'd be a great resource, probably cost effective as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to certainly hunt around and make sure we aren't just picking our favorite person, whoever that may be. But yeah, we'll go through a process like we always have to kind of make sure anyone with an interest can submit their credentials as well. Any other feedback on, Travis? I like your idea of just general sentiment, and I'll work on some wording around that. But any other feedback on kind of short questions you'd want to see included in the survey? Didn't need my Apple Watch to give an answer there. All right. Well, I'm not hearing any. So do you want to just, Travis, you mentioned the check kickoff. We want to chat about that really briefly. Does that work?
What was that, Ben? Was that a question for me? I kind of lost you.
Yeah, I think the only other thing is chatting a little bit about the kickoff timing.
Yeah, we just want to now get it between now and the end of school, or yeah, I guess the end of school before we start losing people in the summer.
Sure. And when does school end?
19th, I think,
Of June?
of June. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I will get a doodle pull out to the group to BDAB this week and check in with Damon and Josh as we've discussed. And we'll get it locked in. That's the other kind of, that and the SWAT, I think, are the two things to kind of get the ball rolling here. And now that we're going to have some clarity, we have clarity around council goals, we'll have clarity around staffing. I think we're ready to kind of move forward on that. So perfect.
Sounds good.
That's a good deadline too. Always better to have a deadline than just an intention to get something done.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right. Well, the intent here was just for a real quick check-in. This is certainly useful for me to kind of bring this back up on the radar screen. So I appreciate you all taking a little bit of time on a Wednesday afternoon to check in. But any other questions, feedback, ideas, things you'd like to see in May?
No, appreciate your work on this so far. Looking forward to getting it started.
Yeah.
At least on our part. I know you've been working, Damian and Ben and Don.
Yeah, I think we can get rolling now. So perfect. All right. Well, anything else, Keith? I saw you unmuted.
No, I was just gonna say goodbye.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, we will adjourn.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
all.
you.